All right. And share my screen. And start the slideshow.
Here we go.
All right. Are you seeing question number 1? Do you see
No.
question 1? Okay. So what do you think about increasing the allowed density of housing along Skyway and Clark when the sewer comes in? What do you think about 3-story buildings on those key corridors? And do you have any concerns about that approach?
Hmm.
My preference would be single story.
Part of the discussion about that was also to, there might be a way this can help make kind of a more walkable central area in the center part of town. Okay, so I heard one preference for 1 story. Are there any other?
So how would that work with traffic, with denser housing along Skyway? Is that going to be convenient for the residents? And then if you stop and think about evacuation, how's that going to work with that?
The idea was to have any higher density along the main evacuation corridors like Skyway, and not out in the areas farther from the evacuation corridors.
Now, I get it that the overlay area, as you said, is less vulnerable, like the periphery of the town, out on the town boundaries. But if you look what happened with the campfire, it didn't seem to make any difference. You know, the fire managed to reach everybody. So maybe, I guess with moderation, with consideration, it would be okay to have higher density along the main routes.
Okay.
My reservation was mostly aesthetics, but if they were architecturally designed, maybe with businesses on the first floor and then apartments on the next 2 floors, something like that, that made sense. You know, then it makes sense to get more people in a same footprint for transportation, bus transportation, things like that. That makes more sense.
Not only that, Bob, but also the concept that Mark has been talking about at meetings of walkability. Having higher density housing along the main routes closer to downtown means that people could walk there.
Right. All right, let's move on to the next one. So how do you see wildfire risks shaping future housing and safety goals? Which wildfire resiliency policies do you support and which give concern? And so some of the ones we're throwing out for discussion are parks and green belts as buffers, development impact fees, increased requirements like setbacks or fire safe materials, and then programs to facilitate home hardening and vegetation management. And if you have others, we're all ears.
So can you elaborate on the development impact fee?
Yeah, so that could be a fee that is assessed in areas that are likely to be more risky or more hazardous. And then those fees, revenue would be used to help mitigate the improve resiliency in those areas.
And also what has been dreamed up or had in mind for increased requirements like setbacks or fire safe materials? We have setbacks already, and current construction methods, new construction methods, I think vastly improve, for fire safe materials. I lived in a house with redwood plank siding. It was ready to burn.
Yeah,
And it definitely did. And now I've got stucco, and there are alternatives to stucco even, but yeah, I feel much safer in this situation.
right. So are you saying the current code requirements are enough that this town shouldn't go beyond what the code currently requires?
I don't know what's possible, what has been discussed, and what other people feel. I'm not a contractor, so I don't know what's out there.
Okay.
Obviously, if you wrap your house in metal with amazing insulation behind the metal, and put a sprinkler system on your roof, you stand a better chance of surviving. But not everybody's going to be able to do that. So,
Right. That's the hard thing is those things cost money, and that's the balancing act, is to find the balance point between those kind of safety requirements and then what's really reasonable for people to afford.
vegetation management is an interesting topic, because we purchased 2 bare lots next door to our residential lot. They had never been built on. It's raw land with lots of vegetation, and we cleaned it up. And guess what? Next spring, we're going to have to clean it up again. And it's a challenge. So I'm not sure what, well, resiliency policy, vegetation management. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because the lots behind me have not been cleaned of dry materials and burnable stuff.
And I know the town has some enforcement, inspections and enforcement. Do you think those are adequate, or do you think there's more needed there?
Oh no, more is needed. They had 1 or maybe 2 inspectors to cover the whole town.
Yeah.
I mean, I got that firsthand. And I talked to one of them. I went into the fire department one day and talked to one of them. And I can just picture the poor guy. He's all over the place. Huge job.
Yeah.
I mean, things look a lot better than they did, but we've got a long way to go.
Okay. Are there any other wildfire resiliency policies that you think we should be looking at?
It's really tough, because CAL FIRE says you're supposed to have 100 feet around your house for a safe zone, right? Even way before the fire, I defy you to find almost anybody in town, the way the housing was, that has 100 feet from them to their lot line. And now it's better, but not a lot better. You know, the lot lines are still the same. So two people can build houses within like 50 feet of each other. Yeah. So it's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah,
Really.
We probably had 200 feet at our house, but we lived on the canyon and the density of the trees was too high. So you had the treetop fires and the wind and the embers just blowing in onto your house. So even the 200 feet didn't even matter. But I would say, a lot of trees have burned, we should be careful not to increase the density of the trees too much, even though that was one of the most beautiful things of the town, was all the trees before the fire. But if we can just be careful, it's not, and the types of trees.
I think that's equally important, Bob, is the types of trees.
Yeah.
okay. All right, let's go on to the next one.
Aha, there's the question.
Yeah. What do you see as the best practices for managing and maintaining adequate defensible space? None of these are very easy, are they?
Well, I think the first best practice is to keep hammering on people year round about defensible space and what you should and shouldn't plant, and you know, to keep the weeds down and the whole bit.
Yeah.
Super education.
There any others who want to comment on this?
Maybe we should quit building wood fences. I don't know.
And one of the things I have balanced is it's manual labor to weed whack all the Scotch broom and get all that, everything else down. And do you use herbicides, which aren't healthy? The use of herbicides would be probably more efficient, but not the healthiest thing to do. So.
As far as controlling weeds and unwanted growth, where possible, especially around your house, there are other methods, ground covers, chips, mulching, and all kinds of stuff. But if you've got a half-acre lot or more, that becomes quite a task.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. So what can the town do to support residents in extreme weather events related to heat and drought? So the safety element has to look at all kinds of hazards, including heat events. And certainly earlier this summer, the extreme temperatures in Portland and Seattle made us realize even more that we all need to consider the so what could the town do, you think, to support the residents in an extreme weather event?
I kind of lost track. It's been a couple months now since that extreme heat. Were there cooling centers set up? And in fact, was there planning done and all the logistics in place when that occurs? so that it could be executed as needed. I'm thinking the school district. I'm not sure what other facilities are really adequate or encouraged would be good for that, but
Yeah,
Well, the churches in town would be able to handle some of it too.
that's true.
so identify potential cooling centers. I think part of the problem and part of the causes of death in Portland and Seattle too, where people just couldn't get there. I mean, they might have had cooling centers, but they still had people die in their homes who couldn't get there.
Well, then, set up a pardon the expression, hotline number for people to call in if they need transportation. There probably would wind up being, like Bob said, church members who would volunteer to drive people to a cooling center, or other organizations that might be available,
Mhm.
when it's extreme like that. And that might be the case for disabled people with disabilities that can't drive, housebound, and their air conditioner quits, and yeah.
Yep, that's good.
The county does have a notification system set up for folks with special needs or extra needs, seniors, maybe without transportation. Maybe tapping into that somehow to make a call, just to make sure folks are aware they can call people for rides, like Don said, or
Mhm.
like that.
Great, those are great ideas. All right, and then what other ideas or policies, programs, or any other suggestions do you have related to housing needs?
What kind of discussion took place regarding mobile home parks?
We haven't had a lot of discussion about that. The state typically likes towns to preserve those where possible because they are generally affordable housing, which is otherwise really hard to replace. I know, there are some in town that are not, I think, actively, know what the owners have in mind yet to do there.
Leslie, I can speak to that.
Okay.
I'm actually working with RCAC as a consultant to the town. And so some of my staff have had conversations with park owners. And part of the problem is that the financing programs that are designed to help rebuild or to finance mobile home parks don't really fit with what's happened in Paradise. And so it's kind of a mismatch. And we've been pushing on the state to be more flexible. And I don't think we've made any progress yet, but we're hopeful. The other part of the problem is that the park owners may not be interested in rebuilding, but they're not interested in selling necessarily because of the PG&E settlement. So I think that that's entering into the equation.
Because that also figures into fire safety. Mobile home parks are extremely dense, and I defy you to have a safe zone around mobile home in a mobile home park. It just doesn't happen. So it kind of one beats against the other.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the issues that we're dealing with right now, I sat in a couple of meetings around town where we have these large groups of volunteers that want to come in and help rebuild homes, but there's no housing for the volunteers. And when they look at potential sites for the volunteer housing, they're not zoned appropriately. And there's not much flexibility, or not necessarily because the town doesn't have flexibility, but they can't do it. Or we were looking at mobile home sites, parks, but that's governed by the state and they aren't flexible as far as some of the code issues for volunteers. And then some of the grants that are available don't apply to, they apply to homeowner occupying and not just temporary volunteers occupying. So and when you have volunteers that are ready, you want to do it, but the lead time on that is just getting dragged out farther and farther. There's going to be other issues and fewer volunteers. So yeah, the zoning issues and things like that, I would say.
Yeah, I know some of that had to do with sprinklers, not having volunteers sleeping in structures that didn't have.
Correct. Yeah, some of the fire codes and things.
Right. All right, we have another question. And this actually is the last question. So how do you feel about policies to facilitate unconventional building methods or typologies or labor forces to get around construction costs?
I think Bob was just talking about that.
Yeah. So, like you said, we'll find ways to help provide housing for volunteers.
Right. The when unconventional building methods, what comes to mind, I have a friend that built his home down by Butte College, and he used storage containers, 3 40-foot containers, cantilevered over each other and things. And architecturally, it looks pretty cool. Half the neighbors loved it and half of it hated it. But it's pretty fire safe.
What about the gondolas?
Yeah, you probably want to have some design standards, right? for that.
Yeah.
I think there's even a HGTV show now about container living.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that tiny home,
Right.
except he's got 3 of them, so it's not that tiny, really. It's efficient.
This is really another really tough question, because the paradise that burned in the campfire, in a lot of cases, is not a pretty place. Before incorporation, the county, in my observation, is the county just didn't manage things well. Flagpole lots and irresponsible subdivision, subdividing properties, put houses too close to each other. It looked like, yea, verily, there were a lot of whatever construction method you want to use. Hey, that's great. So I think this is another tough one, but I think some really serious thought has to go into what we want to allow in the town.
Yeah, that's always hard, to find the balance between letting people rebuild, but making sure what goes back is safe. Yeah.
Does this process affect the town's general plan? And
Yeah, the housing element is part of the general plan. And the town has indicated they intend to go and also update the other elements of the general plan. And one of those is land use.
Right.
And then there's circulation. Those are the other two big ones. But the state has this deadline for the housing element, and the safety element goes with it. So those are the first ones out of the chute here. But the others, the town plans to follow along and revise the entire general plan.
Gotcha. Yeah, because sometimes it was very difficult to use something that made sense, but it wasn't zoned appropriate, you know. And it seems like we have an opportunity to kind of clean the slate and rethink it all. So
Yeah. So tell me, can you give me an example of where you think the zoning got in the way?
When we were looking for day program sites for developmentally disabled adults, and different places were for sale, but they weren't, they were in the commercial district, but they weren't appropriate for day programs in the town's eyes at that time.
Okay.
So we looked at other places, and it turned out to be great because the other places where we ended up worked out better. But just seemed to be a lot of hurdles
Okay.
when all we were going to do was improve the property. So, but the use aspect got in the ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Susan has mentioned that she felt like the zoning code is way out of date. And as many properties weren't even, they were grandfathered in from the county, and it really needs to be reanalyzed. So it's kind of maybe going backwards a little bit. Maybe the housing element should have been after the zoning, but that's the process that has to be used. So
Right.
Yeah, back, I could tell you the long version of the story, but I'll cut it really short. Years ago, I was looking for a place to buy to create a public meeting facility. And we eventually did it, and it operated for 5.5 years until the fire. But in the process of looking around, I found one facility was the old PID headquarters. And that was commercial, let's see, but across the street was residential. And there was a taboo on, it was just like one right across next to the other, but they were all surrounded by residential. Yet here's this commercial building right in the middle. And it was a contrast. It was a surprise. But what?
Hmm. So what other, do you have any other ideas we haven't asked you about we should explore?
I think one of the major things going on in town for quality of living, quality of life, that Mark Maddox is definitely focusing on and has worked very hard on, continues, is the traffic situation from a safety standpoint and how it's going to impact future development. That's a major interest on my part, because it really kind of biases the way the town operates, meaning the quality of life, the citizenry, for long term. If you got a main thoroughfare running right down the business district and you're really hesitant to try to cross the street, it doesn't make for a great situation.
I think the other thing that kind of overlays this, I see we got to go in a minute, is the Blue Zone project and how that impacts development and quality of life, biking lanes and walking lanes, things like that. It's just kind of an overlay of a community development.
Championing that would also improve safety.
All right. All right, I guess we're going to go back to the main session. I really appreciate your ideas and willingness to contribute. And we
All right, are we all back? Looks like people are coming along. It's almost everyone. I hope you all had good discussions. My group certainly did. Thank you everyone for your participation. Alyssa, can I actually have you go through each note taker and we'll do a quick report back on some of the key things each group discussed. And actually we'll start with those of you at Town Hall. So Susan, any main points to share?
Thank you. Yes, so we had some great discussion about the density along Skyway and Clark. Talking about, probably at this juncture, most comfortable with 2-story developments and could see densities doubling with the current 15 unit per acre up to 30, at least, taking a look at that in that sewer district overlay. And just the discussions about the taller the buildings, the more people that are in the buildings, and still trying to be cognizant of having to move large amounts of people in short periods of time. And so just trying to be mindful of that. And that's kind of, how we're coming to some of these decisions about height and densities. And then also good discussion about the wildfire resiliency policies out there and supporting, and some good feedback also to consider, especially in terms of the wildfire impact fees and the potential it might have for helping with insurance costs, perhaps when you're part of a hazard mitigation program, things like that. And the parks and the green belts, definitely a lot of support there, and about ways for fuel management, whether that's through dedicated crews, volunteer groups, goats, things of that nature. And then some of the concerns, I think our biggest concerns are about seeing our weed abatement program be successful with so many out of town owners, and how do we get there, and making sure that we as a town are following through and making sure that these lots get cleared. So definitely still concerned about owners, walking away from their lots, and how can we get to a place where, people feel safe returning back to town and living here.
Thank you. Tabitha, how about your group?
Yeah, so we had some really good discussion concerning the increased density. There was greater support for single story, but support for higher density granted mix of uses, which also aids in safety and walkability, which we were in support for, and then some minor concern for traffic. As the density increases, it's more people. And then in discussions around kind of fire resiliency and weed abatement, there was strong support for enforcement of defensible space, but maybe just concern over how much work it is and who is going to be regulating that and if it's on all of the homeowners to care for. And then there was also mention of the enforcing CAL FIRE standards of space between homes and structures and just in rebuilding, being conscious of that. And then as far as building materials, we had some mention about variety of home types, but also concern that we are rebuilding in a sustainable way and in a more lasting way. So being conscious that as development standards can become a little bit more lenient to encourage rebuilding, then we're also being conscious of maintaining character for the town and lasting development. So some good feedback.
Thanks, Tabitha and Hannah in my group.
Sure. So for the first question regarding density along the Skyway, and the main corridors, we did have some concerns that 3 stories is very large for the region. Others had no problem with it as long as there is architectural control and they look nice. There was some preference to keep it at 2 stories, but again, if it was nicely landscaped and all that, it would be okay. Regarding parks and green belts as buffers, there was strong support for this. Someone also mentioned they would like to see the river edge even possibly be purchased by the state or the county to maintain it as a buffer and protect against fires coming down from the canyon. There was some slight reservation about the development impact fees. Folks would hate for it to prevent someone from building on the land, but it ultimately depends on how much it is. The only concern about increased requirements for setbacks or fire safe materials is what would happen to the homes that are already being rebuilt. And then there was a lot of enthusiasm for programs to facilitate home hardening and vegetation management. It'd be very good to help homeowners with this, especially for disabled folks or someone that doesn't have a lot of income to be able to do it themselves. And then in our discussion about maintaining adequate defensible space, someone mentioned it would be important to go lot by lot, make sure every owner is doing what they have to do to maintain the defense of the whole town, that it's really a group effort. However, others mentioned it is difficult for some owners to do this, especially some who aren't physically in town, and that it takes too long to get some people to do their tasks. So maybe we need faster acting laws that allow the town to act faster than 1 year. And then lastly, to support residents in extreme weather events related to heat and drought, someone mentioned or recommended that the community centers be made available or other facilities to use power and AC.
Thanks, Anna. We have one more live poll to just finally to gain some final feedback on which solutions people are most interested in. So once again, if you want to go to your internet browser or get your phone out, you can go one more slide, Tabitha, or actually 2 more slides. Of the housing solutions you heard tonight, which do you support? And you can select multiple here. We want to make sure the policies and programs that we put forward in the housing element are backed by the community. So curious what you think we should move forward with.
And let's just make sure, I know there were some people who had some technical difficulties. If you're still having an issue accessing the poll, please put up the raise hand reaction and I'll reach out to you.
And we'll also be distributing this after the event for people who weren't able to attend. So if you aren't able to troubleshoot it with Alyssa, there is another opportunity. So it looks like every solution has at least one person who supports it. So that's good. At least right now we're tied with increased density in the sewer service area and exploring funding and partnership opportunities for affordable and supportive housing, which just now edged forward to be a number 1. And then when thinking about resiliency, last live poll question tonight, which of these solutions do you support? And once again, you can select multiple answers. Any last responses? Oh, still a little bit of movement. Once again, all the policies have at least a little bit of support. It looks like the strongest contender right now is for green belts or parks on key parcels, followed by increased fire resiliency requirements. Thank you everyone for weighing in. And like I said, we'll follow up to get a larger group of the community also to weigh in on this. Before we leave for tonight, and I know we're a little bit over, so I'll go through this quickly, but just want you to know what to anticipate. On our end, we're going to be working hard the next couple months to incorporate your feedback on the housing element and the safety element, and we'll be putting that out published in November, and we have to get it approved by the state to make sure we're in compliance with state law by June, by the summer of 2022. So that's a high level timeline. On your end, your next steps, should you choose to, are to, next slide, Tabitha, to take our exit survey to give us a little bit of feedback about what you liked tonight or what we could do better. And 2 lucky winners will win a $50 gift card to Nick's. So hopefully that piques your interest. You can also get signed up for updates. To do so, you can send us in the chat what your email address is. You could also sign up if you're in person at town hall. You can give your email address to the people there, or you can send me an email. Just let us know however works best for you. We'll be sending an email to everyone that attended, if you are willing to share us your email, to, like I said, have a version of the poll that you did tonight that's available to the rest of the public. And so please tell your friends and family. If you want to review the element when it comes out in November, we would love any feedback. And finally, you can check the town's website and we'll put that in the chat. If you don't want us to flood your inbox, we wouldn't flood it. It would just be a couple updates. But if you don't want us in your inbox, that's another way to stay in touch. And with that, there's my contact info and Susan's contact info. Please be in touch if you have questions or comments. And thank you so much, everyone. If you do want to stick around to discuss some of the topics a little bit more, I know some of the breakout rooms got cut off a little early. You're welcome to do so, but we did want to wrap up for those of you that have to leave. So thank you, and I'll stay on. Looks like we have a lot of people that wanted to stick around. Thanks, everyone. Let's see what our final number is, and then we can figure out our best strategy.
Susan, could you also unmute again?
Yes, unmute.
Thank you.
Susan, how many people do you have that wanted to stick around?
Do you guys want to stay? Yeah, I still have 4 here.
Okay.
We have 5 participants on our end.
Should we go back into breakout rooms for those who are virtual, and then those who are in person can keep discussing too?
Yeah, we can do that. We still have, yeah, we have a couple that we weren't able to get to. We go back
And just make sure you hit record again, Susan, and stay off of mute. Thank you. So we can I guess we do need to go in a breakout group, so Alyssa will do that for us.
Give me one moment. I'm just gonna add us all to a single large breakout group.
Perfect.
There we go.
So Tabitha and Leslie, what question did your group end at?
We got through them all.
Oh, okay. We were in the middle of talking about extreme weather, and I'm glad Vicky's still here because I think she was the one that actually got cut off when she was talking.
Yes, I was.
Do you want to finish your idea, your thought?
Yes, I was one of those people who was living in my RV for 14 months, and that included 2 summers. Just got into my house in July of last year. But even with an air conditioner in there, and mine was a fairly new RV, inside the RV, it would be over 90 degrees inside with the AC running. And that is extremely miserable. And it's like setting a tin can out in the middle of the hot sun and not expecting it to blow up, kind of thing. And with most of us moved up here rather than Chico, I think a lot because it's typically anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees cooler up here. And with all the trees gone, it is just the opposite now. It almost feels like it's hotter up here than Chico sometimes. But I think that there needs to be something available for people, especially people who are living in RVs while they rebuild, to be able to get out of that heat. The winters are not as bad because you can always put more layers on, but in the summer you can only take so many layers off before you get arrested. And we need to have some options for people. And I know there's a lot of people out there who were going through the same thing, but they don't have the contacts available to be able to even find someplace to go. And they may not even have cell phone service and things like that. So I would love to see something like that for people to get through until most of us have rebuilt.
Yeah, and one thing I keep hearing from Leslie is if it can break 100 degrees in Portland for over a week, it can happen anywhere. So.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And Vicky, that study that I was talking about, the plan, the resiliency plan, is going to take those other things into consideration. And there's one other thing that's going to be taken into consideration, which wasn't mentioned tonight, which is flooding, which can happen in burn scar areas when you have heavy rains. So that's another thing that has to be looked at.
Yes, I remember there was concerns about that right after the fire because we got hit with a ton of rain that we could have used a couple of weeks earlier that might have prevented some of that fire.
Yeah.
Any other ideas on extreme weather events and what the town can do to help? Zeke, are you raising your hand?
Yeah. Part of it, I think, is reimagining what paradise, what the vegetation looks like. We've got the pine tree on all of the bumper stickers and the heart, the pine tree of the heart around it on the California map for paradise. But the pine trees are really like the thing that took paradise out, because they burn like crazy. And pine trees are also kind of a relic of fire suppression, where we have a lot more pine trees than we did before we started putting all the fires up, because the baby pine trees grow in thick mats and they get killed by fires. So I think if you go back and look at pictures from like 150 years ago, there were a lot of black oak trees there. And so part of that, when we imagine a future of paradise, especially with climate change, that we shouldn't imagine that it's going to be a shady pine forest like it was before, but it could very well be a black oak forest. And black oak are good food for deer and turkeys, and even people eat acorns. People eat black oak for thousands of years. So part of this supporting people in heat and drought is creating an urban forest that's more fire safe and adapted to our future climate. And in a strategic way, let's work on restoring oaks in our parks. Black oak are a lot less flammable. So being kind of strategic in what we plant and where, but definitely thinking of the urban forest. You know, the ridge is hot and gnarly right now just because we lost our urban forest. But we need to be really kind of deliberate in how we restore that. And part of that is like, don't encourage necessarily tree planting programs that plant a bunch of pine trees.
Mhm.
Zeke, is there a way that that message could kind of get put out there for the residents? Because I know a lot of people who are purposely replacing their pine trees.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's the best lead on that. You know, the Butte County RCD, the Resource Conservation District, was doing some work on that topic. I think, you know, it kind of happens at a community level too, with people in the garden clubs and talking to neighbors.
Okay.
The UC Cooperative Extension has some good resources around that. And their job, they're part of the University of California, and their job is to kind of help people with stuff like this.
Okay.
So I'll put an email in the link of someone you can talk to about this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
That also sounds like a promising policy for the housing or the safety element too, you know, an education program on resilient landscaping.
Right.
Well, there is a lot of conversation about resilient landscaping, but so many of us don't really know what that means. You know, we all loved our lush yards we had before, and it's easy to say plant fire safe stuff, but we need to have a way to be educated on what exactly is fire safe, and we still want it to look good. We don't want to have a cactus in the front yard next necessarily, even though that would be fire resistant, but it's not really something most of us want to have, and that's why we moved up here, is because we love the way it looked up here.
Yeah.
And thinking about how most people heard about the event tonight, it sounds like electronic sharing of, you know, just a simple, what is fire safe, or what are fire safe plantings, and trying to get that out on social media might be a good way to go forward.
Yeah, the Fire Safe Council has done a lot of work around that. So if you, they've got some good outreach programs, so you can get a hold of them. They should be able to connect you with good information.
There are also a lot of Facebook groups that popped up right after the fire. I run one of them, and anything that pretty much that the town puts on their Facebook page, it gets shared to my group. So the more things the town can put out that is information we can pass on, that will help get a lot of that education out there.
Great.
All right. Then our other question we didn't get to in our group is pretty broad, and we kind of covered it throughout, but just other ideas, policies, or programs or suggestions do you think we should consider as we try to meet our housing needs? I know it's a tall order, and that's kind of what our job is too, but just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything lingering out there that we don't know about. We definitely want to lift things up that might be stewing in the background for you. Okay, well then I'm going to ask for your reactions to one other thing we've been thinking about, and that is tiny homes. Those could be one solution to some of the construction costs if we have a tiny home village. Wanted to get reactions about that, since it is a new housing typology, and if there's any other policies or partnerships you want to put forward on other ideas to address construction costs.
I used to kind of object to the idea of tiny homes. I like the idea of having them be in little villages where they're limited in. We aren't going to worry about our neighbor putting in a tiny home across the street and bringing down property values. But I do like the idea of having neighborhoods that are exclusively that.
What about you, Alan? Are you still there?
I'm still there. I guess as long as they're fire safe constructed, it's a good affordable housing solution for some people. And depending on how they're built, they have to be in a village because they don't all have everything you need. Depending on how tiny they are.
So kind of like some shared space and.
Yeah, and you know, community kitchen kind of thing, or stuff like that. I've seen that in some tiny home villages in other places. And you know, there are a lot of other unconventional building methods coming along. There's a company out of Nevada called Boxable that they're building fire resistant modular units that ship really cheaply because they they basically fold up to an 8-foot by 12-foot box. That's hence the name. And they ship them on a truck, and you know, you can get a 450 square foot complete unit with sleeping area, dining area, kitchen, bathroom, for 50,000 delivered. And that was their goal. And they said they were gonna, they were just getting it up and running this past year, and they said they were gonna concentrate on California as their first market, but I haven't heard much lately about them. But there's just a lot of stuff like that going on. You know, different kinds of modular construction and different fire safe construction that's being considered, you know, by a lot of different people.
I know we do have some of those alternative building materials that are actually going in this area where they have, you know, all concrete and or all like basically like cinder block kind of things. I've seen a couple of them go in on in the area that I'm at. I'm glad people are utilizing that kind of stuff, but some of us just, we like our conventional. I always think of things like, well, how do you put pictures on the wall if you've got concrete behind and things like that? So I'm maybe creating problems that don't really exist. I'm sure they've done something to solve that issue, but it is good to see some of those alternative things going. But I hear a lot of people saying fireproof, and I don't think there is anything that is actually fireproof out there right now.
Yeah,
Fire resistant, yes.
yeah. Habitat did some houses, and you know, they got the it's concrete in foam forms, and the foam forms, you know, you can run your electrical wires and all of that and on the inside, but then the interior of the house, they just have regular wood frame walls, but the entire exterior is, you know, pretty fire resistant. And then they put on fire resistant roofs with sprinkler systems and roof vents that don't allow embers to get in. So
yeah, I think we all have to put in the vents that don't allow the embers in. But I remember I evacuated in the 2008 campfire, and we put a sprinkler up on our house, and I remember twice coming back and the fire department had turned them off because it was drawing too much pressure from them being able to fight what they might need to fight. So are rooftop sprinkler systems even allowed?
they were putting them in, and I thought it was a requirement.
No, the interior sprinklers, yes, but that's not to keep your house from burning. It's just to give you time to get out.
Right, right.
But I must have misunderstood. I thought you were talking about roofs that had exterior.
No, but the roofs were, I think they were, I don't know if they were tile roofs or metal roofs that they were putting on, but they were a different roof that was fire resistant.
Okay.
All right, so I heard Boxable as a potential company to check out. Habitat for Humanity as someone who is not in the traditional labor force that could help with the labor shortage maybe. alternative building materials, and sounds like there's also support for tiny home villages. Anything else that you want captured?
I think the tiny home villages, that could be a good fit in kind of trying to reimagine mobile home parks, because, from a firefighter perspective, mobile home parks are pretty indefensible. And they're already zoned for high density, and they already have, paved access and clustered utilities. So I think, there could be some good ideas about how to kind of reimagine what a mobile home park looks like. How do you build something similar community-wise that's more fire resistant?
Thanks, Steve. Well, those are all of our questions. Alan, I have a question for you, and that's, when will you learn about the grant? Do you know?
Well, the awards are made in December, and if we are lucky, we'll start in January.
Okay. So there might be a little bit of overlap when we are in the finalizing stage of our work. So maybe we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Any last words from anyone?
I used to work for FEMA before I came to work for RCAC. And, one thing that we always stressed to people was, especially in a situation like this where you're building back from scratch, is that you have to take mitigation into consideration in any plan that you do. General plan, housing plan, anything that you're doing, including your zoning. And it's just paramount if you want to mitigate against the future risk.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you, Alan and Vicki. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you for all this.
Yes, thank you for making this venue available to us.
Absolutely. Have a good night, and we'll be in touch, hopefully.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Alyssa, do you want to put us back in the main room?
Yeah,
Or-
I can, or you guys can definitely just leave this and go back to the main room.